Welcome classic rock fans to one of my introduction to videos. Now I've only done one of these in the past, that was my intro to Jethro Tull, and I will kindly, for your convenience, stick a card somewhere up there so you can just click on it and enjoy that as well. So the motif is as before, you've got to select an album that perfectly represents what this band are. Now I've excluded compilation albums and live albums, which are effectively almost the same. If you look behind me, there's no compilation albums, or hardly any in my collection, because I just feel that they're somewhat bitty, erratic, and somehow don't represent the artist. So we've got to select an album from Yes's wonderful discography, which best represents their music. William Blake said no bird soars as high as when he soars on his own wings. So our job is to provide that perfect platform from which they can leap. I've made no secret of the fact that one of my favourite Yes albums is Topographic Oceans, that glorious conceptual excursion thick with magical musical moments. These sprawling oceanic pieces that many would argue are perhaps impenetrable. And as much as I love this album, 4 sides exploring Hindu Shastras just might not be everybody's cup of herbal tea. So what would you recommend as a starting album for this band? Close to the Edge is one of those perfect albums, very much like Dark Side of the Moon in that respect, but it's still an album that I would consider perhaps a little bit too challenging. It is the record, of course, that spawns the almost transcendent And You and I, but nevertheless, I'm not sure that this would serve as a perfect introduction to this band. I mean, we do get that wonderful sidelong suite that very much demonstrates the, or lays out the topography of the musical landscape that this band wanted to explore. It's a beguiling record. It's, philosophically dense, it's melodic, complicated but beautiful to boot. I'm just not that convinced it's that accessible, and therefore not an album that I would present to somebody as an introduction to this band. Now, Fragile might be a good choice, but for me I think those umma-gumma moments distract a little bit from it. It's an album that's all those musical ideas and lyrical themes that we identify with Yes falling into place here. We have those science fiction fantasy elements of Yes. We get the wonderful artwork of Roger Dean, of course, which is referenced by John Anson a few years later of his solo album. It was the album that very much defined or set Yes off on that journey through the 1970s. Of course, Rick Wakeman had joined with his wonderful Moog exploitations, melding beautifully with Steve Howe's jazzy stylings on guitar. And it's an album that sees the band employ a more aggressive style. South Side of the Sky is absolutely sublime, Long Distance Runaround, and of course Roundabout. As I've said, some of the solo stuff on here does feel a bit like filler, although I think Steve Howe's moment is absolutely brilliant. And we get Relayer, of course, as the follow-up to Topographic Oceans. The problem I have with this album is very much the same as with the former, that it's incredibly dense, I think. We get some rhythmically fairly challenging instrumental sections, and it's made up of solos for the various instruments with delicate vocal and choral sections as well, which certainly lends this album its ethereal quality, its beauty, if you will. And of course the lovely poetic lyrics in Soon, it's just absolutely delightful. But nevertheless, I would not... certainly would not present this album as an introduction to this band. In 1978's Tomato was now plagued with animosity and indifference. It resulted in a very patchy album at best, although I have to say I think Madrigal is absolutely delightful. And you could look to those early Yes albums, those first 2 albums, but for me Yes are still finding their feet, and they lack those, what I would call those transcendent moments. I mean, Time in a Word, I think some of the orchestration swamp the individual playing on that record. Although I do think it's an album that speaks of the expansiveness that was to come, but nevertheless I wouldn't consider this as a prime example of the Yes sound or what Yes as a band are. I mean, it's very difficult to pin down really, because people often say that Yes are effectively Chris Squire and whoever else turns up. So as a result, you could argue we get a very patchy and inconsistent catalogue here to mine from. And some of those 70s albums, as wonderful as they are, I just feel you would leave the casual listener wandering around this impenetrable prog forest, desperately seeking their, perhaps in the end reaching for their Casey and the Sunshine Band records. Drama is an interesting one as well, but I don't think it's one for the casual Yes listener. It's a very dark record. It has the wonderful Machine Messiah, of course, and of course with Tempest Fugitive, it's like their 80s campaign was kicked off with aplomb, with this record. Although I have to say a lot of the albums that came after this one are a bit patchy. Fly From Here is a great album. It has plenty of drama, no pun intended. As is The Ladder, of course, you know, but as regards an album like Open Your Eyes, or Heaven and Earth for that matter, you know, these albums are largely forgettable. 90125 I've often thought is a great introduction, although it doesn't really fully represent Yes, the faithful Yes sound. It was my introduction to this band. I had this record, I bought the live DVD, or VHS in those days, sorry, and they did Starship Trooper in the live concert that made me go and buy the Yes album, so that was kind of my road into this band. And it's a lot of, you know, very high gloss, infectious numbers, which is perhaps what you want to a certain extent. But does it contain the real spirit and essence of Yes? Of that I very much doubt. I mean, you can't help but marvel at the sleekness of it all, with songs like Leave It and Our Song and It Can Happen. And my favourite on this album is Changes. And Trevor Horn's production is sleeker and cleaner, certainly making the material more accessible, commercial even. But it lacks all those literary, imaginary and historical allusions for a collection of songs effectively about the heart. So for my money, I don't think this album is a perfect example in terms of representing the identity of this band. So if I had to choose an album that perfectly represents this band to the casual listener, for me I've whittled it down to 2 records. The first one is Going for the One from 1977, a slicker album that still has its exquisite transcendent moments of yesness. And this album was released in 1977 as the spit and nihilism of punk was pogoing its way across the urban working class landscapes. A generation beguiled by these phlegmy young upstarts gobbing anarchy in the UK at them, rather than these wondrous stories told by these prog behemoths that just didn't quite gel with them. What this album does, and does beautifully, which Relay couldn't do, is it allows some space and some light back into these compositions. We get that bluesy opener and the magical madrigal moments of wondrous stories, as well as the cohesive epic of the 15-minute Awaken. And the 5 tracks on this album still retain that mystical, abstract lyrical images that very much part and parcel define this band. The music is so grand and melodic, yet achieves a perfect balance between the vocal harmonies, the remarkable guitar work of Steve Howe, Wakeman's keyboards of course, not to mention the solid rhythms of the Alan White's drumming and those insane bass lines of Chris Squire. Or if you didn't want to choose Going for the One, you could go for the Yes album from 1971. Of course Wakeman hadn't joined by then, but it has Steve Howe as the key ingredient which really pushes this band forward, with those wonderful infusion of virtuosic jazz, folk, country, even styled guitars. It's just remarkable. There's plenty of music on here to grab and maintain somebody's attention, from the soaring, ethereal, spacey Starship Trooper to the clap-along I've Seen All Good People. But it's Starship Trooper that really sells it for me, with that epic psych sing-along with a bit of hillbilly guitar thrown in as well. So the 2 choices for me, and I can't decide between either of them, is Going for the One and the Yes album as a perfect introduction to this band. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Which album would you select as being the gateway into this band's music? Anyway, I will leave it there. I would appreciate your comments below and how you feel that we should go with this discussion. Which album would you recommend? But other than that, I wish you all well. Hope you're staying warm and healthy. Looking forward to Christmas. But more importantly, that you keep listening.